I wanted to call your attention to the prophet Hosea for a moment. How many of you recognize, you've been to a Jewish wedding before, how many of you recognize a couple of passages, a couple of verses in there that are found in a Jewish wedding? Trick question, right? Actually, the groom says to the wife, if you look at verse 21 of Hosea 2, I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me. In righteousness, in justice, in grace, and in compassion, I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you will know Adonai. Now you recognize, of course, that Sarah did call her husband Adonai, my Lord. You find that in the book of James. The fact is, the husband in a household, a godly household, is doing with his wife what the Lord is doing to us. In other words, it's through the husband that the love, the agape love, in a believing household flows from the husband to the wife. And that is the way God has established that. You're going to find it in the scripture several times between Shaul and Kepha, Peter, where it says, husbands, love your wives. Now, if you go into the Greek, you're going to find this is not phileo, this is not a friend love, even though a husband should be a friend to his wife. My best friend is my wife. You who are married, your best friend should be your wife. Husbands. And then it says in Scripture, in both Peter as well as Paul, you're going to see where it says that wives are to respect their husbands. Now what you're seeing here in verse number 18 of Hosea chapter 2, on that day, says the Lord, you will call me Ishi, my husband. Whenever you hear a E sound at the end of a Hebrew word, it's making it possessive. Ish is the Hebrew word for man, or in the case of a married man, husband. So my wife calls me Ishi, my husband. And no longer will you call me Baali, my master. Now, the word Baal does not necessarily mean an idol or pagan god. Baal means master. Baali, again with the E sound at the end of it, means my master. The thing that the Lord is saying to Israel, and you probably noted from the previous verses, that Israel had turned their back on the Lord. And God went and said to them, you are not my people. Lo ami. Am means people. Ami, my people. What we're seeing here is a remez between our passage that we started in the Torah today. I actually see a couple of remezim. One of them being at the very beginning of this new book that we're entering into, Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness or in the desert. We see that something is about to happen in the desert. We open up with what? With a census. So what you see here in Bamidbar, the book of Numbers chapter 1, verse 2, God is commanding Israel, take a census of the entire assembly of people. In other words, count them. Then what you see in chapter 2 of Hosea, nevertheless the people of Israel will number as many as the grains of the sand by the sea. So now you've got the tie together, a remez, between a count and numbering the people. Even though here we see in chapter 2 verse 1 of Hosea that they cannot be counted. Here in Numbers chapter 1 we see that those who are 20 years or older, males of the various tribes except for the Levites, are to be counted because they're going to be subject to military service. Here we have the remez, the tie together between Hosea, that gets us to this Haftorah reading, and what we had in our Torah portion. My next remez I see in verse 16 of Hosea 2. But now I'm going to woo her. I will bring her out to the desert, Bemidbar, to the wilderness. You see, what God is doing is separating Israel, the adulterous one, from the nations, so that he can woo her as one who is courting his fiancée, his future wife. God is going to go ahead and then give her vineyards from there and hope. And it says she will respond there as she did when young, as she did when she came up from Egypt. The Baalim, verse number 19, those names will be removed from her mouth. They will never again be mentioned by name. And what I love seeing here is, even though God is frustrated and angry at Israel, God will once again take her back as his wife. Bring her back to the place that she belongs with him. Finally, we look at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. The remez between all three has to do with the count. In the first two, in the first one, it's God who's doing the count. In the Hosea passage, it says these people are going to be numbered greater than the sands of the sea. And finally, when you get to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, who was going to do a count of Israel? A pagan emperor. And it was Emperor Augustus. All three of these are tied together by a count, by a census. And that's how we get our reading today. So I found it very interesting, because here God is making it so that we understand he is taking Israel back as a wife, even though she was unfaithful to him. And I love the part in that scripture of Hosea where you see in the wedding ceremony, you see the husband saying to the wife, I will betroth you to me. God is that loving to all of us, his people. Today we're going to finish up with the Gospel of Matthew. We talked about this a little bit last week, and I made a connection already between the Lord and the wedding service and the traditional service. I will betroth you to me. But here's another statement that's actually stated or shouted at a Jewish wedding service. When the groom is called, he's come up front by the word Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. What we saw in Matthew chapter 23, verses 37 to 39, was here's the Lord looking over Jerusalem, unbelieving Jerusalem. Jerusalem who's about to have him put to death. He's looking over the Kidron Valley. He's looking from the Mount of Olives. And I've been there 3 times, looking at the Golden Gate across the Kidron Valley to the city of Old Jerusalem. And here's our Lord looking for the very last time over that valley, looking at the city, looking at those who are about to kill him. And he says to her, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets. You stone those who are sent to you. How often I've wanted to gather your children, just as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you refuse. Look, God is abandoning your house to you, leaving it desolate. Now we recall from last Shabbat the parable, actually it wasn't a parable, the cursing of the fig tree. And we saw that the fig tree was representing political Israel. And it was political Israel that was about to be destroyed. Political Israel. Those non-believing Jews in Yeshua, out of Jerusalem, and that is about to be destroyed. And in 70 CE, it was by Titus, General Titus, son of Vespasian. And God was, like he did with the cursing of the fig tree, literally there was the cursing of political Israel. That. But you see, they were the ones that had turned their back on the Lord. They're the ones who had stoned the prophets. They're about to destroy the sun. Yeshua is making a prophetic statement here. For I tell you, who's he talking to, folks? Is he talking to those who are believers in him? He's talking to unbelieving Jewish people. In Jerusalem specifically. Now, I had seen, during my studies, I had seen a picture of Jerusalem in the 1800s. And I saw shepherds, Bedouin shepherds, driving the sheep. And it was desolate. It was not inhabited. It was totally desolate. Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain, wrote about that when he went to visit the land, and he was saying how desolate it is. On occasion, you will see a Bedouin. But you're not seeing what you're seeing here today. You go to Jerusalem, and you see a flourishing city. Sure, you see the ancient walls. But what you're seeing, not only in Jerusalem, but you're seeing all over Israel. Things that were planted since the Jewish people came back to the land. The land is flourishing. And it's beautiful. And the Lord is doing wonderful things here. He's saying to non-believing Jews, you won't see me again until you say. Again, he's speaking to non-believing Jews. Christians, from the time immemorial, they have been crying, even as Shaul would say, Maranatha, which means, come quickly, Lord. And the Lord hasn't come back. Hasn't. Or we wouldn't need him. Christians can cry Maranatha until they're blue in the face. There are churches today that are boycotting Israel. I don't care how many times they cry out Maranatha. What they are doing is coming against the people of Israel, even if they're non-believing, because it's Jerusalem non-believing Jesus is talking to. He's saying to non-believing Jews, until you say these words, church, you can say all you want. You've been saying it for the last 2,000 years. It ain't going to do you one bit of good. It's not coming until non-believing Jews say these words. Sorry. If you're a Christian listening to these words, listen, I'm not trying to be derogatory to you. I'm just stating a fact. Jesus, Yeshua, is making a prophecy here. And he's saying to non-believing Jews, until you say out of Jerusalem. Now, since 135, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, you know, for a little time there, under Bar Kokhba, son of the star, for a little time there, we coined our own coins. And sovereign nations coined their own coins. For a little while there, we were coining them. We considered ourselves a sovereign nation in 135 under Bar Kokhba. It didn't last very long, did it? The third and final Jewish rebellion ended up in defeat. Bar Kokhba was killed. So what we see here is since 135 and until 1948, better yet, until 1967, when Jerusalem was once again taken by the Jews, complete as its capital, the city of Jerusalem. For all those years, there was no city of Jerusalem from whence Jewish non-believers could cry these words. Those prophetic words are able to be said at any time, right now. You've got non-believing Jews. I guarantee you, you've got them in Jerusalem. Are they crying out? Has the Messiah come yet? No. I'll tell you when they're going to cry out. Anybody following what's going on in the Middle East with ISIS? You know, ISIS is right on the Syrian border. We've been there at the Valley of Tears where the tanks are. The Syrian tanks. It isn't a very far jump from the Golan Heights. ISIS is right there at the border, folks. We're talking about Syria. What is ISIS doing right now? Anybody who's on my Facebook understands what they're doing, because I say it very plainly. In case you don't know, in case you haven't been following it, what's happening to Christians in Syria? What's happening to them in Iraq? What's happening to them? They're being beheaded. Girls, young women are being kidnapped and raped and sold as sex slaves. If you're married, you think you're exempt. No, they kill your husband and now you're theirs. Sorry. They're doing atrocities. They're doing real nasty things. I'll tell you when non-believing Jerusalem is going to cry out those words. Zechariah chapter 12. Read it. If you haven't read Zechariah chapter 12, you better start reading Zechariah chapters 12 to 14. And the reason why is it's going to tell you that all the nations surrounding Israel are going to come against. And it says all the nations of the world. And at one time I said, no, it can't possibly happen that the United States of America is amongst those nations. But guess what? My opinion has changed over the last few years. Since Obama came into office. Obama is not a friend of Israel. I don't care how much he protests. He is not a friend of Israel. What's going to happen? Israel is going to be surrounded. Read Zechariah chapter 12. Over what? Jerusalem. Look at it with me. Zechariah chapter 12. I believe all the prophecies in this Bible are going to be totally fulfilled and come to pass. Follow with me. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1. A prophecy, a word of Adonai concerning Israel. Here is the message from Adonai, who stretched out the heavens, laid the foundation of the earth, and formed the spirit inside human beings. I will make Jerusalem. You've got to have a city named Jerusalem that is inhabited. I will make Jerusalem a cup that will stagger the surrounding people. Even Judah will be caught up in the siege against Jerusalem, and when that day comes, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people. All who try to lift it will hurt themselves, and all the earth's nation will be massed against her. When that day comes, I'll talk about that day in a moment. When that day comes, I will strike all the horses with panic and their riders with madness. I will keep watch over Judah. I will strike blind all the horses of the people. And going on down then, look at verse 8. When that day comes, Adonai will defend those living in Jerusalem. Look who that is. Drop down to verse 9. When that day comes, I will seek to destroy all nations attacking Jerusalem. I will pour out on the house of David and on those living in Jerusalem a spirit of grace and prayer. And they, who? They, Jerusalem, will look to me whom they pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. They will be in bitterness on his behalf, like the bitterness for a firstborn son. When that day comes, there will be great mourning in Jerusalem, mourning like that for Hadad Rimmon in the what? Valley. Megiddo Valley. What is that day? That is the day of the Lord, the battle of Armageddon. Jerusalem is going to be surrounded by the nations. Jerusalem is already being set up as a cup of reeling. Here's how it works. Netanyahu, not too long ago, proclaimed, Jerusalem will never be divided. It will always be the eternal capital of Israel. Praise the Lord. But the Palestinians say, no. Jerusalem is going to be the capital of our Palestinian state. Is that the setup, folks? Is that what it's going to be? Which side do you think Obama wants to be on? I'll tell you. The Palestinian side. Now, if you're Catholic, may I try not to offend you, but the Pope, the new Pope, just came down on the side of the Palestinians and looked at Abbas as an angel of peace. Folks, we are headed for major war. Now in Zechariah chapter 12, it talks about half the women in Jerusalem being raped. What is another characteristic of these wonderful ISIS devotees? They do that. They rape women and little girls. Sir?
Right after the Pope, did you hear, after he accepted them as an ambassador from, that type of thing, 132, I believe it was, nations also signed a petition that was standing in agreement with the Palestinian state.
Right.
So the majority of the nations are already there.
Yes, the majority of the nations are already there. Thank you. I'm just telling you, you just look at the world events that are happening, and this is the setup. It's happening. It's ready. And it's going to happen, because biblical prophecy is true. So, Jerusalem is going to become really. I'll tell you which side we should be on. Should be on God's side. Because if you poke at Israel, you're poking at the apple of his eye. And I don't know about you, but when I get poked in the eye,
It hurts.
it hurts. Listen, there is a Jerusalem now. The entire city is in Jewish hands. It is the capital of Israel. Israel is a sovereign nation. Israel, though, for the most part, are not believers in the Lord. That's true. That's statistic. More and more Jews are coming to faith. I remember back when I came into the Messianic movement in 1987. There were only 250 Messianic congregations, like us, in the entire world. Wow. There are more than 250 Messianic congregations in Israel alone right now. God is doing something. He's turning the hearts of his people to him. But it's going to take a cataclysm like that. Zechariah chapter 12. To be able to cause them to cry out these words, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai. One rabbi, a non-believing one in Yeshua, at one time said, if things really got bad, we'll cry out for the Messiah to come, even if it turns out to be Jesus. Because a lot of things that have been done by the church against the Jewish people over the centuries have not been very kind. And I'm just being nice. When Yeshua is speaking to non-believing Jews in Jerusalem, there are some things that have to be in place for him to return. Number one, there must be unbelieving Jews in Jerusalem. Jerusalem must be in existence as a nation. May 14, 1948. Jewish people must be living in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem must be in Jewish hands. And it came into Jewish hands all the way in 1968. And then those unbelieving Jewish people, we're a stubborn people. It has to be something very, very profound and significant before we cry out those words. Now, as believers, hey, we can start right now. We don't have a problem with that. But they do. The thing we need to understand, though, is it'll take a situation like Israel's about to be totally destroyed before we cry out. That will be in Zechariah chapter 12 through 14, all the way through. Read it if you have never read it before. Now the kingdom, or not the king, well, yeah, at the time of Yeshua, when the temple was standing, and the fig tree was still there, but it wasn't giving forth fruit. It had the leaves. Political Israel was a nation, but they had turned their back on God. Matthew 24, verses 1 through 2. Yeshua is saying about the stones of the temple, they're going to all be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing. Now, when Titus came after the siege and came into the city of Jerusalem, he really didn't want, as so some say, some historians say, he didn't want the temple to be destroyed or burned down. Well, guess what ended up happening? There came to be a fire. A lot of fire with a lot of heat equals what with gold? It melts it. Now, the temple was made out of what? Stone. Well, when gold melts, it goes ahead and finds anywhere it can flow in, including the cracks of the temple floor. And so it ends up flowing into those cracks. Now, Roman soldiers, being as greedy as Roman soldiers were, or maybe under command to get all that gold, because the temple had a lot of it, what do you think they had to do with all those stones in order to be able to get at the gold? They had to pry it out and dump it down. So if you go to Jerusalem today, you're going to see a lot of stones that are still down. That's what they did. Yeshua's prophetic words. Now the next question was, by his disciples, when are these things going to happen? Well, we need to understand that there are things called thematic recapitulations, right? Where themes repeat themselves over and over and over again. We've gone over that over the last quite a few years. When themes repeat, when prophetic events repeat. And in this case, obviously, we're going to have to see a dual fulfillment. The first and most immediate one in the destruction of the temple was in 70 CE by General Titus. Okay? That was done. And if you're a preterist, you say, well, yeah, that's prophetic. It's all done with. Don't need to go over that again. Yet, there's a future fulfillment in the Antichrist or Anti-Messiah. Just as there was a past fulfillment with Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, what did Antiochus do in the temple? He offered pigs. Well, if you go to the book of Maccabees, which I like reading history, that's a good historical book. What did they have to do with those stones that were defiled by pig blood in the Holy of Holies? What did they have to do? They had to take them outside of that temple. They put them in a valley until the prophet would come along and tell them actually what to do with it. So those stones were all defiled. They could not remain. They were defiled. They had to be taken out of the temple. So just as in the past, the stones had to be removed, so by Titus, and so also by the future fulfillment. History. The first Jewish-Roman war was between 66 and 73. Now you recognize, of course, that 70 is when the temple was destroyed. What do you think the Romans were doing from 70 to 73? Well, they were laying siege to other parts of Israel, and the last one to go was what? Masada. And you know how they took Masada? If you go there to this day, you're going to see the ramps. The ramparts that are built up along the sides of the mountain to the fortress up there that Herod had built. You still see it. You can look down from the top of Masada, and you're still going to see the Roman encampments. Still there. History tells us what's going on. So there were 3 Jewish-Roman wars before it was all over with. The first one was from 66 to 73, called the Great Revolt. It happened under Emperor Nero. He appointed General Vespasian, the father of General Titus. He appointed him to crush the rebellion. Now, Nero died shortly thereafter. He had to commit suicide under force. And what he had, after he died, Vespasian, the father of Titus, then was proclaimed emperor in 69. He left for Rome to take the throne. Now, in that period of time, in 1 year, this is called the year of the 4 emperors. In 69, those 4 emperors before Vespasian were Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Nero had to commit suicide in 68, and then between June of AD 68 and December of 69, You had the rise and fall of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. Finally, Vespasian, who was the first ruler of the Flavian dynasty. There was, but for a moment, a brief period of escape between Vespasian's siege and his son Titus's siege of Jerusalem. Titus's siege ended all, as we know. Vespasian had to leave right away, and his son Titus had to take over. There was a short period where there's a break between the two. This is a really important thing to understand. And the break happened between the two. Now recognize that Yeshua is a prophet as well. And what Yeshua was saying is, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by her enemies, then know that the time is at hand, and leave the city, go to the mountains. Well, what do you think the Messianic believers who knew what Yeshua's prophecy said, what do you think they did in that short window of opportunity between Vespasian and Titus? You know what they did? They left. So you see, Yeshua then is talking in a more immediate sense of this, and yet there's still a possibility of a future fulfillment as well, which we have yet to see. In other words, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by her enemies, as in Zechariah chapter 12, then what?
Run.
Run. Exactly. Now, what's going to happen when the words Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai happen, or said? The Lord's going to return. Now, I can't speak for all eschatology in the short period of time. You know, there are a lot of flavors of eschatology or last days events. When I taught it in the yeshiva, it was really interesting. When I taught it, I said to my students, listen, it hasn't happened yet. I can't look at hindsight yet. And whenever you're looking at a prophetic event that's talked about in the Bible, 2020 is better, not quite. Not even quite 2020 in hindsight. However, I said, if you can defend your position scripturally, you're going to pass, even if you disagree with me. So, if your eschatology is different than mine, that's okay. I think we're going to find out at the end, no matter what, anyhow. I'm not saying I'm right, but I could be. We'll find out. Here's the coming of the Lord. The Lord is speaking, Matthew 24, 29 to 31. You're also going to see in Revelation chapter 19, and of course we just talked about Zechariah 12 to 15. Now, one of the characteristics of in the days of the last days is as in the days of Noah. Now, you're going to find people today acting as if nothing in the world, no problems at all, everything is just fine. People are going to be, as Yeshua was saying, in the days of Noah, they were eating and drinking, taking wives, becoming wives, until Noah entered the ark. Everything was fine. Isn't that the way the world is going pretty much anyway? Especially in this country. We're a bunch of ostriches when it comes to anything that's going on in the world, and we tend to ignore anything that's not taking place here. But it's coming to our doorstep anyway, and before too long, none of us will be able to ignore it very long. Now, I want to bring my own opinion, and this is why I said you may disagree with me, that's fine. If you're a pre-trib rapturist, and you can defend your position, I've passed my students in the past for that, fine. I used to be a rabid pre-tribber. I used to be on the door, knocking doors. The Lord's coming soon. You better come to know Him or you're going to be left behind. You know, the Left Behind series, Tim LaHaye and the rest. I like listening to Hal Lindsey. He's still there. He still believes in her pre-trib rapture. I like listening to John Hagee. He's a pre-tribber too. I like listening to all these people, but I'm not a pre-tribber anymore. I was one of the students at the classes that the late Dr. Walter Martin taught. Not college or anything. It was at Melody Land in Southern California, Anaheim. And I'd go across the freeway, what was it, the 5 or whatever, I can't remember what it was. It's been a long time. What?
405.
There it is. And I went across, I didn't drive across the freeway, but I went underneath the overpasses. And I went over there, and I listened to him. And there was a question that came up during the class that he was teaching that day. And a couple of us cornered him at the very end and asked him the question, well, what should we do? Because I was a rabid pre-tribber back then. He said, do this. The more I've studied into it, do this. Pray for pre, prepare for post, and you won't be disappointed. Well, I've come from the pre to the post at this point, and here's why. Now, the day when the Son of Man comes, it'll be like in the days of Noah. Back then, before the flood, people went on eating and drinking, taking wives and becoming wives until the day Noah entered into the ark. Now, let's make a distinction between the people at large and Noah, because that's what the Scriptures do. So, the Scripture says the people went on eating and drinking right up until the day Noah entered the ark. Then it goes ahead and says, and they. Now, keeping within the context of the whole thing. Didn't Noah know that there was going to be a flood? Yes. So obviously the they there wasn't Noah. Again, we have to make the distinction between the people at large and Noah. So who didn't know that there was going to be a flood coming? The people. Noah did. Then it says, until the flood came and swept them all away. Again, in the context, the people, not Noah. So there's a group called the people, that are the people at large, that didn't believe in this, didn't believe in the Word of God, didn't believe in a flood, didn't believe that all this stuff was going to happen. They're the ones that get swept away. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. Then there will be two men in the field. One will be taken, and the other left behind. Well, the people were the ones that were swept away or taken. Where was Noah? Still on the earth.
He was left behind.
Still alive. Noah is the one that's left behind. Hello?
No answers for me.
Now, why didn't I see this for decades? Rabid pre-tribber that I was. Why didn't I see that? Well, today I tell people I don't want to be the one that's taken. I want to be the one that's left behind.
Wasn't he the seed that got left behind to repopulate, and all the tares were kind of taken away?
Yeah. So the only harvest were 9.
Noah went in and minority came out the majority. Did you see that?
Yep.
I'll go for no.
So the one that's left behind is Noah. Not the people. The people are destroyed and taken away. There will be 2 women grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken. Well, that's the people. The other will be left behind. That's Noah. So when you watch the Left Behind series, they've got it all backwards. You want to be left behind. You don't want to be taken. But you wonder, where in the world are they all going to be taken to? Well, let's talk about this thief in the night thing, because that thief in the night oftentimes ties with the whole thing. That the Lord is going to come like a thief in the night, and if you're not a believer in Him, you will be left behind. Right? That's how it works. Good fear factor thing. I better come to the Lord right now. I mean, that's the one positive thing I will say, honestly positive, about the pre-trib rapture thing. Because if you don't become a believer now, who knows? Maybe the Lord is going to come right after or right now. You're going to be left behind. Sir?
That poses another problem. If they come to the Lord now so they can get raptured later, and they realize something happened, they didn't get raptured, what are they going to do then?
That's going to be a big problem. You know why?
They get kicked off and say,
Wait a second.
The heck with
I have a feeling.
You go, I'm so sorry, Lord, or
I would be very angry. I would be, if I were discovering that as you're talking about, and I've been promised that I'm going to be pre-trib raptured out of here before any bad things happen. And when beheadings happening, and when mass rapes happen, and when kidnapping happens, and sexual slavery happens in this country, and I discover we are really in the tribulation, I get that rhema, I'm going to be angry at a few people if I'm holding my hope on a pre-trib rapture. I could be angry at Hagee. I'm going to be angry at Tim LaHaye.
You don't want
I'm going to be angry at Hal Lindsey.
I want a refund. Yeah.
I want my money back. You know what? They're going to say, I didn't sign up for this. What about this martyrdom? What about going to the cross?
The horrible part is they thought they were coming to know the Lord. First of all, if they actually know Him, they know that He can't just pop out of nowhere at any given time. There's a set appointed time for it. So, I'm just saying there's going to be some extremely disappointed people.
Extremely. Just like Jason was saying.
With all of this martyrdom, that proves the fifth seal has been already opened. Otherwise, people wouldn't be beheaded.
We're seeing things happening, and I don't think people are fully aware of what's happening right at this moment. You know what? As far as I know, and as far as you know, we're likely in the Great Tribulation right now.
That's the fifth seal. The decapitation of the saints is the fifth seal.
What I'm saying is we're possibly in the Great Tribulation. How many blood moons have we had already? 3 in this tetrad. Is it possible that this correlates with Joel? That the sun will be darkened between the first 2 blood moons and this one in Passover this year? What happened? Solar eclipse. Blood moon, solar eclipse, blood moon, one more blood moon. We could very well, and I'm not making a prophetic statement here, we could very well be in the Great Tribulation now. Which means all the more, now Lord willing, I'll be doing my teaching at the conference this year about being faithful even unto death. That great possibility I'm going to talk about is that we could all end up martyred, losing our heads. Every now and then when I have a conversation with Phil, I said, you like that? You like where it's at right now? We need to be realistic, folks. We need to be realistic. That could very well happen. Have we not had a couple beheadings in the United States of America by these radical terrorists already? Yes. It's here. We got to move on, or I will truly not finish today. And that's a possibility. We could go that way. But that thief in the night thing, you know, if the owner had known when the thief was coming, he would have stayed away. Look at Revelation 16, 15, and 16. Now, by the way, some will argue, and I will concur, some will argue that that is a scribal entry that was made later. But it is in our scripture. I'm not going to be the one that sits in judgment on that, but I see a remiss here. I saw a remiss here, thief of the night. I see a remiss here. Behold, I'm coming like a thief. How blessed are those who stay alert and keep their clothes clean, so they won't be walking naked and publicly put to shame. Now listen, verse 16. And they gathered the kings to the place which in Hebrew is called Harmageddo. By the way, I just showed you Zechariah chapter 12. What valley is it? The valley of Megiddo. So the Lord is going to come during the battle of Armageddon. That ends the question, unless there's some secret rapture that Hal Lindsey and some of the rest of them keep promoting. That ends that pre-trib rapture hope. We have to be realistic. I think we got to get our heads out of the sand, and we got to say that possibility exists, that we may very well be martyred, folks, and that the Lord is not coming until the battle of Armageddon. Now, can I say this? Paul says that those who are alive and remain until the time of his coming. Now, what does that postulate right there? That some people that are believers are going to be alive at the time of the coming of the Lord. Do I have a problem with that? Not whatsoever. I'd say, hey, we need that. And it says by the Apostle Paul that those who are dead in Messiah shall rise first, then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up to meet him in the air. I don't have a problem with that. If I'm martyred, Revelation chapter 20, verse 4 says I'm going to be reigning and ruling with Yeshua for 1,000 years because I'm going to come to life. Do I have a problem with that? No. I'll be glad that I'm going to be in a glorified body, that maybe I might have to have an idea what that means. And I won't have any hindrances with this flesh that says, I don't know what to do, I don't reign and rule nothing. Thessalonians, Paul writes, this is key phrase. You've got to pay attention to key phrases. We just talk about that day. That day, is that correct? That day is the day of the Lord. In the proper context. Paul and the rest of them, and the rest of the apostles and our Lord Yeshua, isn't speaking out of the vacuum and making up something. He's talking about something that was well known, and it was called the Day of the Lord. And it was well known in Jewish thought in the first century. Paul is writing in 1 Thessalonians 5. He says, but you have no need to have anything written to you, brothers, about the times and the dates when this will happen. Because you yourselves well know that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Now we're getting something put together. What's going to come as a thief in the night is what? The day of the Lord. Verse 4, but you, brothers, are not in the dark, so that the day, that's another way that's known, and it's in the prophets, that day should take you by surprise like a thief. Now, if you don't have a hint or a remiss of that one, you got to see it's there. It's the day of the Lord that comes as a thief in the night. Not like some secret rapture thing. It's the day of the Lord. Peter confirms that. Now you have Paul, now you have Peter. There's your second witness. 2 Peter 3, 10 through 13. However, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. Now you've got your second remiss. On that day, the heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will melt and disintegrate, and the earth and everything in it will be burned up. Since everything is going to be destroyed like this, what kind of people, and he's asking us as believers, what kind of people should you be? Hello? What is our life supposed to be? Holy. What tells us what holy is? Paul tells us, Romans 7 verse 12, that the Torah is holy, righteous, and just. Oh, I need to know what holy is? Where do I get that information? Torah. Then Romans 7 verse 14. But the Torah is spiritual. Oh. Walking in the Spirit is walking according to what? Torah. There's nothing new. It's exactly right. So, you and I, now when we get to, Lord willing, I'll be at the conference teaching on this. When we get to that teaching on being faithful to the end, this is one of the things that we need to address. Why do you think the Lord has been putting it on my heart for the last few years? Not only one, to be preparing His people for these times of tribulation. But the most important thing we can prepare people to do, number one, is get your lives right with God. I don't care if you don't have a single food scrap saved up, like some preppers do. I don't care if you have a single bullet, like some preppers do. These are dangerous. If you don't have your life right with God, and if you're not walking holy with Him, anything you might do, you can have all the preps in the whole world. Anything you might do is for naught, because in the end, you die. We all die. And all that, if you don't have your life right with God, all that was for nothing. There are a lot of people like that today. I know preppers that are not believers in the Lord. Oh yeah, they have a fortress, they have guns, they have food, they have everything. Well sure, they might live for a few years, But then they died. And all that was for what? There's only one thing that's going to last for eternity. You know what that is? Knowing Him. And better yet, Him knowing you. How do you walk, folks? How should we be walking, everybody? We should be walking holy lives. Peter admonishes us. As we wait for the day of God, work to hasten its coming. That day will bring the destructions of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt from the heat. That sounds like nuclear war to me. Moving on. Revelation 3:3. Remember what you received and heard and obey it. Turn from your sin. If you don't wake up, I will come like a thief. There's your thief again. Remes, remes, remes. What do we need to be doing? Walking holy lives. What do we need to do? Shema, hear from the Lord. Not just hear, obey. And shuv, repent. Teshuvah, from our sin.
They got to wake up first.
Yep, we got to wake up. You know what your and my task happens to be? We're the ambassadors of our Lord. We're the shlachim. According to Matthew 28. I send you to do what? Make talmidim of the nations, teaching them to observe everything that I told you. Listen, we're called to make ambassadors. We're ambassadors. We're called to make disciples. You know what? One of the reasons why the world is the way the world is today is because the salt is not doing the job that salt should be doing today. We're the salt of the earth. And if we're behaving like the rest of the world, what value do we have? So we need to see it. Let's wake up. Let's see. Let's do what we're called to do. We got to introduce people to the Lord because He's coming. Now, this prophetic day of the Lord. Now, I'm only giving you a little sample. Isaiah 13:9. Here comes the day of the Lord. What kind of a day is that? Full of cruelty, rage, and hot fury, to desolate the earth and destroy sinners. Lamentations 2:2. You have summoned my terrors from every direction as a festival day. On the day of the Lord's anger, not one escaped, not one survived. The children I held in my arms and raised, my enemy has destroyed. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about the battle of Armageddon. We're talking about blood coming up to the horses' bridles. We're talking about Jerusalem with half the women raped there. And I know quite a few, and I have some friends there. My heart goes out to them. Some are not believers in Yeshua. Ezekiel 30, verse 3. For the day is near, the day of Adonai, day of clouds, the time of the Gentiles. Joel 2:31. The sun will be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Amos 5:18. Woe to you who want the day of the Lord. Why do you want it? This day of Adonai, it is darkness, not light. Is this a beautiful day? You know that one song that we sing from time to time? Blow a trumpet in Zion, sound it on the mountain, and we dance. We have fun. But you better read the context of that thing. You're talking about the day of the Lord, a day of battle, when the armies of darkness come and overrun the land.
But don't forget, there's always joy and victory. And
Exactly.
Joy in the morning.
There's always joy and victory in the Lord. I'm thankful. If that was all it were, I think Paul said it, well, we are of all men most to be pitied. But fortunately, the sunshine. Didn't your newscaster tell you today was supposed to be a thunderstorm? We were supposed to have thunderstorms for the entire weekend starting today. Guess what? Sunshine. Beautiful. I'm not complaining. Zephaniah 1:7-14. Keep silent before the Lord Elohim, for the day of the Lord is near. Adonai has prepared a sacrifice. He set apart those he invited. The great day of Adonai is near, and coming very quickly. Hear the sound of the day of Adonai. When it's here, even a warrior will cry bitterly. It's a day of fury. trouble and gloom. Going on from that passage, that day is a day of fury, a day of trouble and distress, a day of waste and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick fog, a day of the shofar and the battle cry against the fortified city. I will bring such distress on people that they will grope their way like the blind because they've sinned against the Lord. We could go on and on. This is not a very pretty thing, but it's the day of the Lord that's going to come as a thief in the night, and it's the day of the Lord. At what battle is this whole thing taking place? Armageddon. That's the battle that's coming. I'm not going to go through the rest. Continuing on then with Yeshua, he spoke in Matthew 26, 1 and 2. Again, he speaks of his impending death. There were plans made to arrest Yeshua, put him to death in verses 3 and 5. By the way, if you have the Gospel of Matthew, the socio-rhetorical commentary by Keener, a lot of good information there. Finally, for last week's, we haven't even gotten into this week yet, but this week doesn't have a whole lot to talk about. Finally, from last week that I didn't get to, here's how I'm going to conclude last week's. Matthew 26, 20 to 35. On his Passover, his betrayal, his time, trial, and execution, guess what? We already talked about that. You remember I took an intermission from the Gospel of Matthew to talk about Passover. Guess what? I'm not doing that today. We're going to close up with the resurrection. The 8th and the last section. That's this Shabbat's message. And you'll see how short it was. That's why I had to cover last week's. Matthew 28, 1 through 10. You saw the woman at the tomb early on what we call Sunday morning. You see that they came, Miriam of Magdala, Mary Magdalene, as people call her, and the other Mary went to the grave. There was a violent earthquake. The angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled away the stone, and sat on it. The guards, by the way. And I wanted to talk about that for a moment, because we're going to get to the guards, and the guards are very important. Now, some translation will say as the leaders of the Jewish people were saying to Pilate, station a guard at the tomb. And Pilate would say, you have a guard. Do it. Set them in place. One of the important things to do, and if you're going to study around, this is a good book to get anyway. And it's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. Get volume 1. Volume 2 deals with higher criticism. And unless you're getting into theologic terminology and things like that, volume 2 is probably not going to help you a whole lot. But volume 1, get that, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. Because he goes into a whole lot more detail of the guard's report. All I want to talk about here is this. It was not just one guard. It was not just one. When you set a guard, even in our military today, generally it isn't just one, unless there's just one facility. I used to have to set a guard around the nuclear platoon and the nuclear storage, I should say, 29 Palms, California. They had us do. Under me, I had 8, I think, people that I had at station. And that was every 3 or 4 hours. When you get my age, you start to forget these things. Gladly. But, you had to post these guards at their stations. And they were awesome. And they had bullets, real bullets, in their 1911. That's back in the days that we had 1911 instead of the 9mm Beretta. See, I'm one of the old guys. We had real bullets there. You know what the purpose of those guards were standing around that place? Do you think that they can stand off the whole platoon coming at them to try to steal nuclear weapons? Not in your life. You know why we have all our service people at the border between North Korea and South Korea on the South Korea side? Do you think that any of our military is going to have a snowball chance in the hot place of stopping the North Korean army from coming across the border? Not a chance. You know why they're there? Because hopefully somebody will get the message out and it'll go up the chain of command so that ultimately they can send whatever force is necessary that will stop the North Koreans. Or my guard that I posted around the nuclear storage facility. Or, in this case, the Roman guards. They're only there as a symbol of authority and power. Can they really stop anybody totally determined to do whatever they want to do? During the Cold War, when we had all those tanks on the border between on our side and Russia, the Soviet bloc, you think that all those tanks could have stopped the Russians from crossing over? Not a chance. You know, the only thing that would have stopped, and I'm not speaking negatively against you and your system, the only thing that could have stopped all those Russians coming across, nukes. If all those North Koreans started to come down, you know, the only thing that will stop them, nukes. Folks, the guard that was posted there were posted because Yeshua said, on the third day I will rise from the dead. And their intent was to go ahead and stop in case the disciples of Yeshua were Meshuggah enough to stop them from stealing the body.
Well, they got boots on.
Now, you notice the accuracy of Peter when he was slashing at the high priest's slave? Did he get the neck?
He's a fisherman.
He just managed to get the ear and cut it off. Were these fishermen adept with fighting tools? So the question is, since there are a few guards, it says some of the guards went into the city and reported to the head priest everything that happened. They met with the elders, and after discussing the matter, they gave the soldiers a sizable sum of money. What kind of money do you think they were giving the soldiers for? It's called hush money. Why? Well, number one, if I were a military person in the Roman Guard at that point in time, I'd just assume that this not even come out, period, because it's attesting to my capability of being a guard. Somehow or other, I let them in and they stole the body, right?
Actually, he would have been put to death.
I don't think so. Look. Priest said to them, tell the people his disciples came during the night and stole his body while we were sleeping. There's something wrong with that story, folks. Now, in our military in the United States of America, I would have been brought up on charges if I would have slept on duty. Sorry. But back then in the Roman legions, that was not the case. If you were caught sleeping on duty, your death was guaranteed.
Aren't these temple guards not Roman guards?
The temple guards were burnt by,
sleep, yeah.
you know, the supervisor going around if they saw a temple guard. So I'm saying in the same sense that they're not playing games.
If they would have been Roman guards, they would have been put to death.
Yeah.
They would have never openly admitted that.
That's right.
Some money.
Let me share with you this. Our military is a lot lighter than the military in other nations. I was a technical instructor at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Not only did we teach, and I was a Marine, not only did we teach other services, including the Army that was there, but we taught soldiers or military personnel from other nations. And we had people from, like, Nigeria, and I'm not going to make any negative commentary, but we had people from Nigeria that would come to our classes. And one of the things that our instructors had to do quite frequently, because they eat a different diet, you know, it kind of goes along with that old adage, you are what you eat. I don't know what they ate, but they had BO that if they came in on one side of the entryway down the hall, you knew a Nigerian entered into the room. You always had to keep telling him, you need to go back and take a shower. You need to go back and take a shower. Now, one of our corporals, who was an instructor, sent a Nigerian back. He'd already come from the barracks. He, came into the classroom. The corporal went ahead and said, you need to go back and take a shower. And this Nigerian, who was private, I don't even remember his name, but I knew him. He went ahead and hit our corporal. Our corporal was a non-commissioned officer. Hit the corporal. Now the corporal, of course, in our service, back in the day when we were younger, in the Marines, all you did was to take off your stripes, your shirt with your stripes on, and go out back and you settled it between your two. But instead of doing that, he didn't. He reported it up and went up the chain of command. We never saw that Nigerian again. Ever. He was sent back to Nigeria. Interestingly enough, a few months later when another class came through with Nigerians, we asked, well, what happened to Private, I can't remember his name. Well, because he had struck a non-commissioned officer, they summarily executed him. Our military is far more lenient than theirs. A whole lot more lenient. Let me explain to you this. Here, back in that day and age, even if it were the temple guard, there are stories that told about people who fell asleep on duty, and oil was poured on them and set on fire. They burned to death. You do not sleep on duty. Period. So listen to this. If the disciples came in during the night while they were sleeping and stole the body, what do you think the governor would do about it? Pontius Pilate? They're dead meat. Yep. In the most cruel way. So these priests assured them, we'll put things right with him and keep you from getting into trouble. They took the money, they did as they were told, and that's how that story was spread about by the Jewish people until this very day. So, I'm simply trying to say to you, if you were standing guard back in those days, you wouldn't get away with that. That's a story that just would not have happened, and you would have to be aware of some of these things. Just like in our military, people probably don't imagine half, if you're a civilian, you don't imagine half of the stuff that went on. That we had to go through that. Okay, moving on, we're almost done with today's, and it will be 5 o'clock soon. The hill of the Galilee. Here's where Yeshua ends up going. Nobody tells us what hill it was, Matthew 28, 1 through 17. But we're told that a hill in the Galilee is where Yeshua told them to go after his resurrection. When they saw him, they prostrated themselves, and some hesitated. But it was there in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, that the Lord gave the Great Commission. Not only to them, but he speaks down through the ages to all of us, as we were talking about earlier. We're the disciples. We are the Shlachim. The Lord has said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, therefore go. That's Shalach in Hebrew. Go. Shlachim, we're all the Shlachim. We're the ones that are commanded to go. You don't look at me and say, well, you need to baptize so-and-so. Did you know you have authority to do that? You have it. You are the Shlachim. You are the ones that make disciples. You are the ones that can immerse them into the reality of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You are the ones that teach them to obey everything that the Lord's commanded. And you're the ones that need to remember, as I am, that he is with us always, yes, even until the end of the age. Folks, we're not alone. He is with us. He's going to empower us. Whatever we're about to go through, even though it sounds very scary and everything, don't worry about it. It's not for us to have to worry or to fear. Who's with us? Who's going to bring us through? The writer of Hebrews, chapter 12, talks about the one who's the author and the perfecter of our faith. Who is that? Who is at the goal? It's our Lord Yeshua. He is going to give you what you need in that situation as you go out and do what he says, making disciples, making them into disciples, and